Hey there, my name is Cole Adams, and you are watching the best college basketball podcast out there that covers the entire sport of college basketball, brackets, bubbles, and bid stealers. Now, here are your hosts, Sam Fetterman and Jonathan Lidskin.
Season 5, Episode 79 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. I am Jonathan Lidskin. No Sam Fetterman with me tonight, but we do have a very, very special guest. Quentin Corpuel, Mizzou student, works for Rock M Nation, covering football, basketball, all sorts of different stuff there. Joins me tonight. Quentin, how are you?
We just watched a really fun
Thriller.
first four game. That was electric. I'm going to have to disagree with, I think it was either Jay Wright or Seth Davis that said the first four games between 16 seeds are the best games of the tournament. I see where he's coming from, but it was really exciting to see a team like Alabama State that had never won an NCAA tournament game before actually complete a Hail Mary. Don't see many of those ever. Yeah. I am a big opponent of Hail Marys in the final seconds because they almost always don't work. But it worked for the Hornets, although I do feel bad for St. Francis, PA. That was a cool story. I think one of the CBS guys wrote a really cool feature on him after they won the NEC. And sucks that they had to go out like that, but that's March.
Yeah, they were 311th in KenPom. I want to say it's one of the lowest ever to enter the tournament. Took down CCSU in a massive upset on the road in the final. So crazy stuff. But yeah, the Hail Mary thing, it was obviously exciting, but pisses me off because I'm not a huge fan of that. I think it works like way less than people think it does. And you are much better off, throwing the ball to midcourt and, putting up a half-court shot.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, this was a while ago, but I figured if anyone might remember this, it is probably you. It was a Michigan-Wisconsin game from a bunch of years ago, and Tim Hardaway Jr. had just hit a three-pointer.
Yes.
Put Michigan ahead, and instead of throwing a Hail Mary, whoever was inbounding for Wisconsin threw a bullet to midcourt. Ben Brust ties the game with a half-court shot. I would rather have that 10 times out of 10 than a Hail Mary that has a very, very small chance of working.
Yeah, there's been a lot of weird discourse around late game execution this year on Twitter. We're not here to, get into that whole thing, but an exciting start to the tournament for sure. This UNC San Diego State game that has started is living up to be the absolute slot fest that we kind of all expected it to be. But we are here tonight to review something that I created 3 years ago. I want to get out and say this was inspired by the Bill Simmons playoff betting manifesto. I don't know what viewers think of Bill Simmons, but that's how this was inspired. This is the bracket Bible, as I like to call it. Created it 3 years ago. As I've said many times, far from a perfect science. There's no strategy for picking this tournament that is, but it's a helpful set of 20 guidelines, in my opinion, to help you pick an NCAA tournament bracket, taking into account all sorts of past examples, different rules that will start to go over. So why don't we get right into it? So rule number one, and by the way, this is published now and updated on Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers website if you guys want to check it out, but you'll probably get more in-depth analysis of the rules here. So rule number one is take conference tournament week with a grain of salt. This is the first thing that I've always thought about when picking an NCAA tournament bracket is not to overreact to champ week. And I find it even harder to do when you actually go to a conference tournament, which I know you did and I know I did this week at the Big Ten. I've been to the NBC tournament the past 3 years, and that's hurt me picking my bracket. But a couple previous examples of this: 2021 Texas was not very highly ranked in KenPom, won the Big 12 tournament, actually got a bye in the semis due to Kansas getting COVID, and then lost in the first round to Abilene Christian. 2022 Iowa, who won the Big Ten tournament. 2021 Ohio State, who got to the Big Ten championship as I think the 4 or 5 seed. I want to say it was 5 in the Big Ten tournament. And then 2024 Wisconsin last year, who upset Purdue. I think everyone did a pretty good job staying clear of them, but just wanted to get a more recent example on this. I tried to put all the examples on here from the last, 4 years or so, at least post-COVID, but I do have some from pre that. So yeah, take conference tournament week with a grain of salt. Quentin, for this year's tournament, where are we looking for this rule?
Yeah, this is a good one, I think, because recency bias is a very strong thing, just in general, even outside the NCAA tournament. But the last thing that we see oftentimes influences our decision making. I would also throw 2022 Virginia Tech in there. They go on a run in the ACC tournament, and they got me. They got me. I thought they were going to win a couple of games. I really wanted to see Hunter Couture fly up the lane and knock down a handful of threes off of elevator screens as much as the next guy. But that didn't happen, obviously, because they lost their first game. But in my head, the last thing I saw of Virginia Tech was them playing really well. And I thought that would carry over into March, and it didn't. I think this year, look, I mean, I feel like there are a handful of examples. I feel like in the inverse way, Wisconsin, like they put up a clunker in the Big Ten championship. Now we can go over later. I think they're a good team to talk about with other points in this Bible. But I think Wisconsin is still a very complete team. Like what happened in the Big Ten championship game, I am not putting a whole lot of stock in there. This is still like the best offensive team Wisconsin has had in literally decades, led by the Big Ten Player of the Year, who I am so happy for after last season's debacle here at Mizzou. Gets to the free throw line a ton, can score at all three levels, and Wisconsin has a litany of options offensively in ways that I don't think they have in previous years. And so even though they shot really, really poorly against the Wolverines in the Big Ten title, my opinion on them didn't really change from the start of the game to the end.
Yeah, so my kind of first reaction for this rule was Michigan, the 5 seed in the South, won the Big Ten title as the 3 seed. They just, hadn't been playing very well down the stretch, and I know they're kind of unique with the 2 bigs that they roll out there, with Wolf and Golden, and even Cheddar at times operating as the 3rd big. Not that they play all 3 at the same time, but it was a team that looked, kind of clunky, discombobulated in the final weeks of the season, and then they go to Indianapolis, win 3 in a row to win the title. Dusty May said they needed a reset. Dusty May's a good coach. He might be right, but I'm leaning on the side of, this Michigan team is probably the more inconsistent team that we thought they were throughout the year than what they showed in the Big Ten title. And not all of their games in that tournament were great either. I didn't think they played super well in the title game. Neither team did, but that maybe more of a legs and shooting variance thing than anything.
Yeah, I also I try my best to look at the individual matchup, and there's a part of it for Michigan that's really unfavorable. That's been talked about by a lot of people, and it is the turnovers. Michigan, one of the worst power conference teams in the nation in terms of giving away the ball, and UC San Diego, they eat turnovers for all 3 meals of the day. And they're one of the best teams, not just at the mid-major level, but nationally, enforcing turnovers. And so I think that could be a big deal here in, I guess, less than 72 hours.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Oh, that's so cool. That's so great. But yeah, I try to look at it on a matchup to matchup basis, and I'll probably still pick Michigan just because I think Golden and Wolf can have a field day down low. Something that I'm not sure UC San Diego's guards can totally offset with scoring at the other end of the floor. But yeah, that's a good point about Michigan. That's definitely one I looked at as well.
Yeah, Michigan, and then the other team I had kind of down here was Arizona, who I think, they had their bright spots, bad early in the season, good in the middle of the season, kind of came down to earth a little bit down the stretch. They go to the Big 12 championship, beating Kansas, 30 minutes from Kansas's campus, and then beating an Texas Tech team that was not at full strength. So those 2 are really the 2 for me that I pointed out. There wasn't really another team that won their conference tournament that I was like super surprised by. I think Louisville could have fallen under this if they had beaten Duke, but Duke obviously played a tremendous second half, and I kind of think that Louisville team is pretty good anyway. So, maybe other people feel differently. Obviously, I said earlier that I recommend criticism. I'm open to people pointing stuff out about this. It's not perfect. So let's.
Yeah, I'll say one more quick thing about this one. I think in a way, Florida applies to this, just because at least seeing them in person, Jonathan, they looked like the Monstars.
Yeah,
like it was crazy, like how well they were playing. But the thing is, and the reason why I prefaced this with in a way, we already knew Florida was one of the 5 best teams in the country.
Yeah.
Before the tournament started. It's not like they started looking like world beaters right when they got to Nashville.
Yeah.
They've had maybe a few clunkers throughout the season. The Tennessee game, I guess was it the first or the second go around that they got thumped?
Second time they played Tennessee, they got crushed, and Tennessee was short, guys.
Okay, yeah.
Tennessee and Florida have played 3 times this year, and not one of them have been a normal game.
Yeah, it was like they Uno reverse carded Florida from the first time they played them. So like the lasting image in my head is Walter Clayton Jr. jumping 10 feet in the air for an alley-oop, and Alex Condon doing whatever he wanted in the paint, and Will Richard getting open 3 after open 3, and Denzel Aberdeen even coming off the bench and creating a handful of buckets for himself. And so I'm not really sure what to do with Florida. We can get to in a little bit when we talk about a path where I think they could land. But man, oh man, like it is going to be really difficult for me to get what I saw in Nashville out of my head in terms of projecting where Florida can go.
Yeah, Florida's definitely a team that will come up with a couple of different rules. Real quick, I added actually this earlier today, Rule 1A, and I meant to add this after last year because it is more of a trend now. That bid stealers are kind of an exception to the conference tournament rule, just because it's so hard to tell when a team steals a bid if like it's a total fluke, or they're actually like starting to figure it out and play their best basketball. Because bid
this
stealers
year is not applicable.
What'd you say? Yeah, this year is not applicable. Colorado State's the only one, and like they were pretty close to a tournament caliber team anyway. But it is tough, I think, to figure out in this whole situation, what teams like that were bad and played good for a week are going to continue playing well versus teams that like they're inconsistent. They'll play bad one week and good the next, and they just happen to play good this week.
I got. Speaking of teams, I got, and then we can move on. Georgetown a few years ago.
Yeah.
Gavolt.
I was very glad that I liked that Colorado team a ton because that could have gone a lot differently for me.
Yeah, I got fooled by that one. So turning losses into lessons, as Mizzou head coach Dennis Gates likes to say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So rule 2, we just kind of hinted at it. Pay attention to path. A couple examples from the past couple of years from this. 2022 Kansas won the title. 2021 Houston played all double-digit seeds on the way to the Final Four, although it was a little tougher to predict that was going to be their path. And then 2024 Alabama, who probably plays, in my opinion, one of the weaker 1 seeds that we had seen over the last 4 or 5 years. And on top of playing, 2 double-digit seeds in the first weekend and a 6 seed in the Elite 8 en route to the Final Four.
Yeah, I'll start with a little bit of a curveball here.
Mm-hmm.
I look at the South region as a whole.
Yeah.
This could be a friggin' mess, man. Like
this is your weird region.
Yeah, I look at especially the bottom half. Like I'll take Ole Miss. That's who I'll talk about with path here. They play the winner of the first 4 game that's happening right now between San Diego State, who can't really shoot, and North Carolina, who probably shouldn't be here, period.
Mm.
And then their next game is against Iowa State, who's missing one of their top 3 players in Keyshawn
Gilbert,
who was just ruled out for the season. And then was it Tamin Lipsey that was dealing with a groin injury, or was that?
Yeah, he I believe he played in the quarters, or he played in the first round. Or I guess it was the second round of their conference tournament against Cincinnati, and then was supposed to play in the quarters against BYU and didn't. But I would assume, I haven't seen anything that says he wouldn't play this week. I'm guessing they just held him out as a precaution, knowing that Gilbert was going to be probably done for the year.
Yeah, so they get an Iowa State team that, regardless of Lipsey's status, is without one of its top 3 players it's been playing with all season, versus Lipscomb, who, yeah, they're a really good mid-major. They could shoot the heck out of the ball. They're a really fun team. That's a 14 seed. You keep going down, Marquette, New Mexico, and then Michigan State Bryant. I'm going to say it right now, I really think Bryant can beat Michigan State.
It can happen. Absolutely.
I really think it could happen.
Yeah, listen, I'm not picking it. I'm probably will never pick a 15 seed over a 2 seed as long as I live. But I think when you look at the South region, that you see there's one region usually every year where you say, you look at it and you're like, someone weird is winning this region. I don't know who. This is where we get, the weird 6 seed that makes the Final Four, or whatever it ends up being. But yeah, you have an Auburn team up top here that is playing pretty poorly compared to what they have been down the stretch. You have a Michigan State team that doesn't shoot. You have an Iowa State team that's missing one of their best players. You have a Texas A&M team that plays some of the most gross offense you'll watch all year. And then, yeah, you just keep going down. And, there are some like intriguing lower seeds here. This could be pretty weird here in terms of, the path. And then the one I looked at right away when the bracket came out was Florida as the 4th 1 seed. I think got the most loaded region by far. You have a bunch of teams here that I'm super high on, having to play the defending national champions, the 2-time defending national champions in the second round. It is no cakewalk, although I think Florida should beat them if UConn were to beat Oklahoma. But you have a bunch of good teams here, and it's just like, Florida, yeah, they're a national championship contender. All-time great teams like Florida could be, can get through this. UConn had a tough path last year too. Not as tough as this, but they had a tough path. But, it's, if you're picking a national champion, it's just, something to consider that, hey, like this is the 1 seed with most obviously the toughest path. And I guess you could argue Houston too, having to play Gonzaga in the second round. But yeah, it's just Florida was the one for me. I thought, Duke got a pretty good end of the stick here with their draw. I'm not too high on any of these teams in the top half of this East region. So, yeah, this rule is more specifically to me for looking for a national champion, and looking for, like you said, the weird region.
Yeah, and I'm not saying like Ole Miss is going to make the Final Four. I'm just saying like somebody has to make the Elite 8.
Yeah, somebody has to win the games.
Yeah, somebody has to win. And I think Ole Miss has a relatively favorable path compared to probably other 6 seeds in recent years. I also look at the inverse of that, a team I really like that has a difficult path. Sticking with the West region, I really like Maryland, and I'm a little biased because I'm from there, grew up 20 minutes from campus. I wasn't raised a Terp. I was raised a Miami Hurricane, but like that's still the hometown team. And school was really fun when they were really good at basketball. I stood 5 feet away from Melo Trimble one time. It was a really cool experience. I look at Maryland's path. Goodness, like Grand Canyon's just beat St. Mary's last year and returned a handful of those players. Next round, they're playing either Memphis, who's solid. I would say like they're a little more polarizing.
Yeah, the thing with Memphis is they take teams seriously in these kind of games.
Yeah, and then or Colorado State, who's like one of the hottest teams in college basketball. And then if they make the Sweet 16, they're probably playing Florida, who, as we just talked about, looks like one of the greatest college basketball teams of the 21st century right now.
Yeah.
And then if they make it to the Elite Eight, they're probably playing St. John's. That is a really, really difficult path.
Yeah.
And as much as I like the Terps, as much as I want to see the Crab Five succeed, that is a ringer. That is a likely ringer.
War of attrition in the West for sure.
Especially you got to consider how much they rely on their starting five. And sure, you have some instances like North Carolina's Iron Five from 3 years ago that are able to make it all the way to the national championship game and come within a shot of overtime in the national championship game. But that's a tough thing to bank on, especially when you're playing a lot of not just really good teams, but teams that have depth, like Florida, for example. And so I really want Maryland to do well. I just think it's going to be really difficult in that region where, as you said, there are so many teams that are really, really good and have a lot of reasons for people to be high on them.
All right, rule 3, when having a tough time deciding on a game, ask yourself how big the coaching gap is. So this is, specifically when it comes to, scouting and in-game coaching, things that actually, matter once you get to the NCAA tournament, not, recruiting, which does not matter in the NCAA tournament, at least not, present day recruiting. Who you have on your roster obviously still matters. But yeah, so this is, a couple different ones I pointed out from this one. 2021 Iowa versus Oregon. I thought, I picked Iowa in that game. Dana out coach circles around Fran McCaffrey. 2023 Memphis versus Florida Atlantic. I thought the coaching gap was pretty evident in that one. And then 2022 LSU, who was had an interim coach, Kevin Nickelberry, versus Iowa State and TJ Otzelberger. I think this rule is more relevant the closer you think the game will be. If you are really, having trouble deciding between a game, which, I've seen, people say on Twitter this week, hey, this game is giving me a lot of troubles. This game is giving me a lot of problems. That's when you go to, hey, who has the better coach here? Is the gap between them significant enough that I think it could matter? And, the two that I've seen pointed out are if Houston and Gonzaga meet in the second round. People said having a lot of trouble with that. I don't think the coaching gap is significant enough to matter unless you think Mark Few is really washed, which, jury's still out. And then I think, Memphis, Maryland, we just talked about it, is, another one that I think I saw someone point out today that oh yeah, well, I'm having a lot of trouble picking this game. And that one, I've never been the biggest Kevin Willard fan, but I do think that he is a pretty significantly better coach than Penny Hardaway.
Yeah, people really like Kevin Willard. And he also just got a contract extension, which was well deserved. But yeah, I think if Memphis and Maryland do meet, I would not be surprised if Memphis gets outcoached. I will say this: the potential coaching matchups in the bottom half of that West region could be cinematic. You already have Self versus Calipari.
Yeah, that Self Calipari Patino quad is one of my favorite NCAA tournament quads of all time.
Yeah, and then whoever wins that game probably plays Patino. And then in the second round of the Mizzou Drake Texas Tech UNC Wilmington pod, it could be a combination of either McCasland versus Ben McCollum. That would be really fun, or McCasland versus Dennis Gates. And so those are some pretty dynamite coaching matchups. I don't think, unless you disagree, I don't think there are any major gaps in that region.
No, I mean, UConn, Oklahoma. I don't think Mosier's a bad coach, but obviously Hurley is one of the sport's best, and specifically his staff is one of the best. I use this a lot, in the 8-9 games, in the 7-10 games, and then more specifically, in the second round where you have teams on a one-day scout playing each other. Which coach do I think is a coach doing a significantly better job scouting other teams? Do I trust him more to be able to have a better game plan, stuff like that. So yeah, that one day scout is something that Sam and I will probably talk about a lot tomorrow when we do our full bracket reveal. But yeah, so just something to keep in mind. Don't pick a don't pick an interim coach that is taking over like in postseason play to go to the Sweet 16, like I did with 2022 LSU. Don't do that. That's my 2 cents. Rule 4. Quentin, I told you before we started that there is a certain rule that is on life support right now, and this is it. Don't you dare pick mid-majors to win against teams with a ton of length and athleticism. I have had to tinker with this rule. This used to be size and athleticism. It has since been changed since I think mid-majors, have shown, at least in some aspect, that there are some that can handle size. Athleticism is a little tougher just because, high major basketball has a different type of athlete than mid-major basketball for the most part, except, maybe a school like GCU that, has probably way more athletes than they do basketball players. But, I think the ultimate test for this is going to be in that South region, Texas A&M, Yale. Yale is not a team that is overly athletic. They are, not a team that is super big. But you just don't out hustle Yale. You simply don't. It's hard to out hustle most of those Ivy teams. And if there's anyone that can do it, it's a Texas A&M team that is the best offensive rebounding team in the nation. I think if Yale beats Texas A&M on, I think it's Thursday, that early night slate on Thursday, I think I have no choice but to get rid of this rule. Definitely not one of my favorites.
I've had so much trouble with that game because Yale does the thing well that would in turn prevent Texas A&M from doing the thing that they do well. And it's funny because, as you said, they're not very big, but you can't say they're not smart. Mm-hmm. It's just when we talk about not necessarily recency bias, but I think actually seeing teams in person definitely does something to how you view a team. And that first half that Texas A&M played when they came here to Mizzou, when they just killed Mizzou on the glass, especially the offensive glass, that's a very prevalent memory in my head. At the same time, though, Mizzou adjusted, and then they dominated Texas A&M back on the boards. So it's not like the Aggies are completely invincible on the glass. So at that point, if you believe that Yale can gobble up defensive boards and prevent extra opportunities for A&M, which they've thrived off of and have kind of needed because they're not very good at shooting, yeah, I think you should probably take Yale.
Yeah, I think some of the more prevalent examples of this rule in recent years was, the late 2010s Florida State. Dennis Gates was an assistant on that team, as well as C.Y. Young. But those teams were always super long and athletic. Vermont against Arkansas, a Vermont team that was really good, but Arkansas was kind of built on athleticism. And then Charleston versus San Diego State 2 years ago in the first round. I think that was also pretty relevant. This performance that San Diego State is putting on right now, speaking of them, is just atrocious. I mean, like I'm close to turning this game off.
Yeah, I'll probably be sticking with Ole Miss. But just real quick to round out this point, I keep bringing up the reverse of this point. So like a team that I think is the opposite of this rule, to where I think their length can help them against a high major opponent. It's a big part of the reason why I think Bryant can beat Michigan State. Mm-hmm. They are not small.
Bryant has players that were formerly at high majors. And, if you are at a high major, there's two ways you're at a high major right now. It's, you were under recruited and you went from a mid or low major to a high major and moved up through the portal, or you were recruited out of high school because, you obviously had the talent to play at a high major, or were a high major athlete.
Yeah. I think about somebody like Earl Timberlake, started out at Miami. That was a really weird Miami team his freshman year, transfers to Memphis, doesn't really find his footing there, and then goes and becomes the America East Player of the Year with Bryant. And I look at their roster, none of their top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scorers are shorter than 6'6". And I understand, is it Pinzon or Pinzon?
Yeah, Pinzon, I believe.
Yeah, Rafael Pinzon isn't like built, but he's tall.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the times that's an advantage defensively.
Yeah, hard to find 6'10", 6'11" kids at mid-majors.
Yeah. And so I don't think Michigan State can totally dominate them everywhere on the floor, just because there aren't any like shorter guys they can exploit at all 3 levels. And there are non-basketball reasons why I might want to pick Bryant to win this game. Like, they're playing on Friday. My birthday's on Friday. If Bryant beats Michigan State on my birthday, that will be a lifetime memory for me. Like, that would be so cool. I'll probably buy a Bryant t-shirt for all I care.
Go.
And I love teams from the Northeast, like the Mid-Atlantic Northeast. Like, I do have a natural bias towards, just because like I grew up in Maryland. I have a ton of family in New York. I have some family in Connecticut. Even though Bryant's in Rhode Island, that still counts. And like, I feel like that there's just something about teams from that region of the country that really, really speaks to me, whether it be them or the beloved Metro Atlantic. Whoa, I'm not messing that up on this show where I'm taking the place of the Sam Fetterman, the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference. Even though the team that won the conference is the least MAAC team of all of them in Mount St. Mary's, like I will always support, and I always want them to do well. Hell, I got a college basketball crown participant on my head right now in the lovely George Washington University. So it's a little biased, and there are, again, non-basketball reasons for me wanting Bryant to win this game. But as pertains to this rule, I think they can hold up.
Northeast is a special place for basketball. I'm gonna, I've made many friends because of college basketball from the Northeast, and seeing Sam go to all those games up there, it's different in the Northeast when it comes to basketball.
And a bunch of players on Bryant's roster are from Maryland and Virginia.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, Rule 5. No need to go too in depth to this one. Write down a list of teams you think are seated too high and too low, and what they should really be, and keep it next to you while you fill out your bracket. Couple, just examples from this year. The obvious one, Louisville. Everyone was shocked when they were an 8 seed. Memphis, with their predictive metrics, people were kind of shocked when they were a 5 seed. Other than that, like, I don't really have too many gripes with the seeding of this bracket. And this is just something to keep in mind. It's not something to live or die by. That hey, you need to pick against a team that you need to pick against a team that is seeded too high, and you need to pick a team that is seeded too low. But I think it can steer you in the right direction in some cases. Specifically, my first thought is Loyola in 2021 was, I think an 8 seed and a top 10 team in Ken Palm. So you got that with Gonzaga too this year. So
yeah, I see VCU too.
Yeah, that's a good shout.
At an 11 seed, I saw your tweet from earlier about how they're like masked as an 11 seed, but they're way better than that. Yep. I think a lot of the opinion comes from them losing a seat in Hall way back when.
Yep, back in I think it was the Charleston Classic in like the week before Thanksgiving.
Goodness. We thought Miami might not be terrible still.
And what sucked for VCU is that Seton Hall game was in the first round of that tournament, so they had to go play in the consolation bracket and didn't get the better opportunities. Like, they would have seen, I think, Vanderbilt in the next round had they won that game, and then Drake in the championship. So instead, they got to see a Nevada team that missed the NCAA tournament, and I forget who else was in that they played. But yeah, that was a big part of, I think, why VCU was seated where they were, and it happened so long ago that I think it's almost completely irrelevant.
Yeah, and with this, I think about something like fantasy football, where if you like a player, but you see that they are ranked super low on whatever draft site you're using, whether it be ESPN, Sleeper, etc., that shouldn't deter you from taking that player.
Yeah.
So I just try to either make my own big board or just don't pay attention to the number, because it does influence people.
Yep.
And so I think that it is very important just to look at, again, the matchup and the team and try to pay as little attention as possible to the number. I mean, think about UConn from a couple years ago. They were a 4 seed before they terrorized most, if not all, of their path.
Yeah.
And I think a big reason for that was the lull they endured in December and I think some of January, but mostly December, because they were really injured. But the early part of the season and the later part of the season, they were easily a 1 or a 2 seed. And so I think it is very important to not look at the number, because that shouldn't matter a ton in terms of how you look at a team.
Yeah. All right. Rule 6. This is one of my favorite rules, if not my favorite one. Don't sell yourself on players, sell yourself on teams. And a couple times, where this has there's a couple times on this, I should say one time on this where I have been fooled, and 2 times where I have not been, and I was able to recognize this. 2021 Oklahoma State was one of my favorite teams, ever in college basketball that I watched, outside of, the teams I root for. And, looking back on it, it wasn't so much that I liked the Oklahoma State team. It was the fact that I loved Cade Cunningham. And, he was the first pick in the draft. And he, in my opinion, is like the best college point guard as a freshman that I've seen in my life watching college basketball. But Cade Cunningham's supporting cast sucked. Avery Anderson had his moments. Everyone else on that team was awful, and they lost in the second round. And then, you had 2022 Wisconsin with Johnny Davis. I thought was a, pretty prevalent answer here. And then 2023 Purdue obviously had the National Player of the Year with Zach Edey, but I think everyone was kind of, fading them when they stumbled down the stretch there. But yeah, and then you have the second part of this rule is, don't convince yourself that a star has a good supporting cast around him in the final 2 weeks before Selection Sunday. Like those players probably are not, all of a sudden going to start playing very well around a star if they haven't been already. If a second option hasn't truly emerged by, the time March rolls around, it's probably not happening.
Yeah, I think Texas applies to this.
Yes, 100%.
With Trey Johnson. Like, I feel like Trey Johnson is going to be one of those players in about 5 to 10 years where Ball is Life or Throwback Hoops is going to post something on Insta and Twitter being like, Trey Johnson was a problem in all caps. And it's going to be a bunch of inefficient isolation possessions where he just hit a really tough shot.
Yeah.
I don't think Texas is great around him. Like, his shot making has uplifted them so many times this year. And I'm not saying guys like Jordan Pope and Caden Shedrick are terrible by any means. I just don't think the collective is super awesome. That being said, if Trey Johnson goes on a heater, Texas can easily make the Sweet 16. But I don't think the supporting cast is super great, and it is a reason why Texas was really nervous on Selection Sunday.
Yeah, I think the path is there for them to get to a Sweet 16 if they were to beat Xavier tomorrow. But you're right. At the same time, you have a top 10 pick on that team with a bunch of, I wouldn't call them, misfit toys, but certainly not the greatest fits in the world for what Texas wants to do off of Johnson. And then, yeah, so that was, I think, probably my number one. Marquette can be another one, I think, here with Cam Jones. Although I think, their system more lends itself to other guys, being solid around Jones. I don't think there's like a ton of like super great examples for this rule this year. It is one that I loved. Obviously, Broom's supporting cast has been good all year around him. Same with Cooper Flagg. The National Player of the Year candidates and, some of the better All-Americans this year are on really good teams. And so I think, Zakai Ziegler for Tennessee, they have a great team. RJ Lewis was the biggest player of the year for St. John's. They're a two seed. So yeah, it's not super, prevalent like it is in some years. I do think that like one under the radar one for this rule is I've heard a lot of talk this week about Chucky Hepburn and how he's going to, put Stephen Ashworth in a torture chamber. I think Chucky Hepburn can make winning plays on the defensive end. Do I think he deserved the Defensive Player of the Year in the ACC? Like, not really. Do I think he's a really good defender? Yeah. But I don't think he's like a complete, game changer, like defensively at a point guard spot, which I think in this matchup, a lot of people are kind of making him out to be.
Yeah, I also feel like with Stephen Ashworth, like a lot of his work comes off the ball.
Mm-hmm.
And you can still obviously be a great defender off the ball, but I feel like Stephen Ashworth's game isn't necessarily crossing up a guy, taking him one-on-one off the dribble and hitting an up and under layup over your team's best rim protector. Like I don't think Hepburn could maybe put him in a bind like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Louisville's an interesting one. It's so annoying that's the first game of the day because I know I'm going to start my bracket 0-1. That is a classic.
Yeah, I'm just going to get this wrong no matter which way I lean.
Goodness, yeah, that's a tough one. But yeah, no, I think those are all.
Yeah, Stephen Ashworth's a 25-year-old veteran guard that has played in the NCAA tournament multiple times. I don't think he's going to struggle, initiating offense with getting the ball to the wing or throwing an entry pass or anything like that. He has been in this sport long enough to know how to deal with a guy like Chucky. So, and then the next one, Rule 7. So this one is, a little more up and down, but defense wins championships, but offense gets you there. This is the rule that I call it is easier to be 2023 Miami than it is to be 2017 South Carolina. It's just, I think it's a lot easier in the NCAA tournament to, have a team that hits shots and, get some variance, other teams miss shots against you than it is to, have a team that struggles to make shots and you make shots that, for 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's also just tough to predict Nigel Pack turning into God,
Mm-hmm.
Norchad Omier turning into Dennis Rodman, Jordan Miller looking like one of the best glue guys of all time, Isaiah Wong showing why he's an NBA prospect, and then like Wooga Poplar and Bensley Joseph providing punches off the bench. Like sometimes you can't really predict that 5 players or more are going to hit their ceiling in the biggest games.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting because like I kind of think Mizzou falls into this category, but at the same time, this is where I look at a matchup to matchup. Like this is where I look at the tournament on a matchup to matchup basis, and This is a weird matchup with Drake because they want to drag you into the mud, and it will be a struggle to get to 65 points. So that one I'm not so sure of. I think you're the only person in the world that said that first sentence you said about it's easier to be 2023 Miami than it is to be 2020
Probably
South Carolina. I don't think anyone's ever said that sentence other than you. So congratulations.
Like the two teams that I think were like really defense oriented that were, lower seeds that surprised people that made a Final Four were South Carolina in 2017 and then 2018 Loyola. And I just think, I have down here 2024 Alabama, 2023 Miami, 2021 UCLA, which is a little bit more of a stretch, but they were a borderline top 10 offense and a borderline top 50 defense. So I do think that applies in some aspects, but I just think that, as time moves on, college basketball players and basketball players as a whole get more and more skilled offensively. We find newer and newer ways to take advantage of the rule set, and we just become better at more efficient shots. So I think it's just more dependable now to have a really good offensive team and a not so great defensive team than vice versa. Although you do need to at some point in this tournament be able to play on both sides of the ball, as history has shown us.
Yeah, it's interesting because like you look at the NBA, it's not like defenders have gotten worse for the most part. I just think there are a lot of rules that have benefited offensive players in recent years. I also think like players are just getting better. Like you look at the SEC in terms of Ken Palm's offensive efficiency rating, like 3 of the top 4 teams in the country are SEC teams. They've got 4 in the top 10, and I think 11 in the top 40. Like, a lot of those games weren't 95-90, 110-98, because the defense was really, really bad. A big part of it was that these offenses are really freaking good, man. And I'm curious to see how that's going to balance out in the tournament when these SEC teams play not SEC teams, especially ones that aren't super great offensively.
RJ Davis just hit a 30-foot three to end the half. North Carolina leads San Diego State 47-23 into the break.
Oof.
I think, not to veer too off the path here, but I think people got really caught up in the, North Carolina didn't deserve to make the tournament stuff this week, which I agree with. I don't think they should have. But I think people got too caught up in that and forgot that, they're actually in the tournament. And we do actually have to evaluate the team. And, this is a team that I think has a trio of guards that can do some damage.
Yeah, it's not about how you got there. All that matters at the end of the day is that you got there, no matter how deserving you were. And so, yeah, teams like North Carolina, they do make me a little nervous. I did not think they were going to be up 47-23 at halftime. Although I did say earlier that San Diego State really struggled shooting the ball, and that is exactly what has happened.
All right, Rule 8, let's not spend too much time on this one, but don't forget about free throw shooting. I think this is another one that, hey, you can defer to this rule for help in a game you think is going to be really close. You just, you have a game that's a 1 or 2 point spread, and you look at, hey, is there a huge free throw disparity in this game? Both, with percentages and, with how much teams shoot free throws. The only 2 I really found for this one was Memphis, Colorado State. Colorado State's really good free throw team. Memphis, not so much, although they're not horrific. And then Oregon, Liberty. Liberty is a god-awful free throw shooting team. And it's not their guards. It's their bigs are the ones that get fouled, and their bigs are both like sub 50% free throw shooters. So that's tough if you're trying to pull an upset to leave points at the line. But something you probably shouldn't live or die by again with a matchup. But if you're struggling, that could be something you look at. And you're better off betting against the conference than on one. So this is a really general rule. There's no, it's tough to look at individual years and point to hey, this conference underachieved. Like, it's hard to win an NCAA tournament. It's even harder to win as a conference in the NCAA tournament. Eventually teams have to play, tough matchups. Teams from the same conference sometimes run into each other. It will happen this year with the SEC, with how many teams they have in. But, two that come to mind is, the 2019 ACC had 3-1 seeds. One got to the Final Four. The 2021 Big Ten, multiple 1 seeds, handful of teams seeded 2 through 5, in that range. They had no teams in the Final Four. Only, I believe, 1 got to the Elite 8. So it's just hard to win as a conference in March Madness. The SEC, I have been adamant, is the most dominant conference ever in college basketball. I would not recommend going into doing your bracket and going into this tournament with the mindset of the SEC is the most dominant conference ever, so they are going to dominate the tournament.
Yeah, I also think with SEC teams, and I've talked to a few people about this over the past week or so, Dennis Gates talked in his press conference, I forget what day it was, but it was recently. I think a lot of SEC teams could get themselves into serious foul trouble early on, especially against these smaller mid-major teams, where a bump could send a team's big man flying instead of it not really doing anything. Mizzou is a perfect example. They have really struggled with fouls over this last home stretch of the season. And I do worry that it could get them into trouble at some point in the tournament, whether it be Drake or sometime down the line. But I do like this rule. I think about the Big East in 2011 when they got a then record 11 teams into the tournament. you want to guess how many of those 11 teams made it to the second weekend?
Ooh, second weekend. Of 11, I'll say 4.
2.
2. Wow. Okay, because I know you.
One of them was 11 seeded Marquette, who was the lowest seeded Big East team. They made it to the Sweet 16. And then the other was third seeded UConn, who won the national championship.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else did not make it out of the first weekend.
Yeah.
And so your point about it being tough to win as a conference, it has stood for not just the 2 years you mentioned, but the one that set a precedent, really, that was untouched until this year.
The NCAA tournament's tough. You're playing at a true neutral site. You have teams that you really haven't scouted. You're playing unique teams. Like, if you guys watch college basketball long enough, you'll notice that in conferences, teams often play similar styles. And so when you get out of your conference and play in the NCAA tournament, you're often scouting teams that you don't really have a comparable for. We had Mount St. Mary's head coach Donnie Lind on the other night after his team clinched the MAC, and they'll play American tomorrow in Dayton. He was talking to us about how the early thoughts for him and his staff on American was that they really couldn't find a comparison for American within their league. So you're doing a scout entirely from scratch, and I think that's why coaching's so important in this tournament. And I think that's why, again, you're better off betting against the conference than on one. If you absolutely despise a conference and hate it, Mountain West has been, I think, the example of this in recent years. Fine, fade the Mountain West, but I would not advise picking 3 teams from the same conference to make the Final Four, 4 or 5 teams from the same conference to make the Elite Eight. It just two teams from the same conference playing in a title game against each other. It just doesn't happen, and maybe the SEC is the exception this year with how historically good they have been. Rule 10, don't fall in love with teams that would be satisfied with their season before the tournament begins. This is, again, another one of my favorite rules, and I have 2 examples for this that I'll get into in a sec. So the examples I already have down for this, and this was the rule that I have the most examples for because I think it is one of the most common things that I see in the tournament. 2021 Illinois, 2021 Alabama, 2023 Marquette, 2021 UConn, 2022 Auburn. The key for this one, I think, is you're looking for teams that or programs, I should say, that are quote unquote back, or teams that they don't often win their conference. They won the regular season title. Even if they didn't win their conference tournament, they still won the regular season title. Just teams that have a vibe around them that they've achieved all they needed to consider their season successful before the tournament starts. And my prime example for this, and people are not going to like it because
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Super popular Final Four pick this week, St. John's.
Damn it.
And then my other one is actually Louisville too. So I'll get into Louisville in a sec. I'll start with St. John's. I said 3 weeks ago, maybe it was closer to 2 weeks ago, but it was around the time that the Jimmy Fallon song came out. And don't get me wrong, I've had that song stuck in my head for the last 2 weeks. I have it bookmarked on my Twitter. I listen to it every day. It's amazing. It's a cinematic masterpiece. And St. John's had a tremendous season and deserves all the hype that they're getting. But at the same time, I look at St. John's and I look at the way, they've carried themselves over the final stretch of the season. Not to say they're cocky, but winning the Big East regular season and winning the Big East tournament was a huge deal for them. It felt like, St. John's is back. This is the most relevant St. John's has been in 25 years. St. John's, it's like New York is back, on top of the, basketball world. Rick Pitino, they have all this flash, and, I could see them coming up short in the tournament. Not to say that they're going to overlook teams, but I feel like, St. John's loses in the Sweet 16. I think we'll look back on this St. John's season and say, yeah, hey, this was the turning point for the program, regardless of the NCAA tournament outcome.
Unfortunately,
I do love them though, and if they made
unfortunately, I get it.
it'd be amazing.
Unfortunately, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you look at sports history, getting even a small kick in the ass right before the postseason pays so many dividends. You look at the 2007 NFL season, the Patriots beat the Giants, I believe, in the final week of the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
Complete a perfect regular season, and then they lose to the Giants in the Super Bowl. I've heard multiple people, especially Patriots people, say that they wished the Patriots had lost that game to the Giants in the regular season,
Mm-hmm.
because that would have forced them to look inward in a way that they probably didn't otherwise. I even think of like my high school's girls soccer team when I was a senior. They lose a couple of games late. They were really good. They lose a couple of games late. They were forced to make some adjustments, and those adjustments propelled them to a state title. This past fall, they just won their 4th state title in a row.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Like it trickles down, and it is a real thing. And I'm not saying that St. John's, should have lost at any point in the Big East tournament. But yeah, like you're feeling really good, especially because, as you said, the program hasn't felt good in our lifetimes, like nowhere near this level. And it sucks because, like, I obviously love New York basketball. I got a Knicks hat over there. I was watching the Knicks Heat game last night. I was like, wow, Tracy Morgan throwing up before the game might propel a Knicks run towards the end of the regular season. But I get it. This is not the time where you want to feel on top of the world. You'd rather have that happen when you lift, or if you lift, the NCAA championship trophy.
Yeah.
And not your conference tournament one.
Yeah, and then less of a relevant one, but I think still, sort of relevant for this tournament is Louisville. Again, a team that, kind of feels like the program is back. We hired the right coach. We had a great season. We went 18-2 in conference play. And this is also, I think, twofold, because something that, I kind of realized in my head this week is, like, when do you see, like, teams, like, publicly complain about their seed and it ends up working out for them? Like, the last team I remember, there are teams that I remember over the years doing this that it just has not worked out. You had Michigan State goes and wins the Big Ten title in 2016 and thought they deserved to be a 1 seed, and then they lose to Middle Tennessee State in the first round 2 years ago. And this actually happened 2 years in a row for Texas A&M. Once when they missed the tournament, and the next year when they made the tournament. And everyone, they thought they were underseeded as a 7 seed. They might have been underseeded as a 7 seed, but they got killed by Penn State in the first round. So I think, that's part of how I'm evaluating this game, but obviously not the whole story.
Yeah, and then lastly, I also think about Miami in 2012-13, the team that made me fall in love with college basketball. Just for context, my parents met there, so I was raised a Hurricane, and it was that team that brought a new energy to the program that had not been seen on that level ever. Like they were good in the late 90s and early 2000s under Leonard Hamilton, but they had never reached the heights that they did in 12-13. Naive little
Duke came Miami and lost by 25 that year.
Yeah, it was awesome. I watched the whole thing. It was great. And they lose in the Sweet 16 to Marquette.
Yeah. Vander Blue, baby.
So annoying. They should have lost that game to Davidson.
They really should have. All right, let's go to Rule 11 here. Beware of teams you like matching up early and on one-day scouts with unique teams. So over the years, I have a couple different examples of this. Press Virginia with Bob Huggins. That was a team that burned me in 2017 when I had Notre Dame in the Final Four, who had to play West Virginia in the second round and just looked totally unprepared for their press from the get-go in that game. The Syracuse zone with Boeheim was, I think, a very common one over the past couple of years. They knocked out 3-seeded Michigan State in 2018, 3-seeded West Virginia in 2021. It's just, a tough thing to prepare for, even if it's not a super great defense. It's a tough thing to prepare for. It tempts you to shoot a lot of threes and subjects you to more variance. And then speaking of variance, the new kind of trend with the unique teams has kind of been the Alabama math ball. So like you look out for the team. And it's not so much Alabama this year, but in past years it has been where you get the teams that run and gun and take a ton of threes and kind of X out mid-range shots from their game plan. That's tough to prepare for and change your defense for.
This is where I worry about Mizzou.
With Drake?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
They have not seen this kind of team all season long. Drake is going to test Mizzou in the half court like Mizzou has not seen at all this season. And it's flustered multiple high major teams, including Miami, who we talked about earlier, back when we didn't think they were going to be completely terrible. Mm-hmm. And I like how you brought up the Syracuse zone because, we talked about with North Carolina earlier. It doesn't matter how you get there, you're there. And that's kind of what's mattered for Syracuse. They have gone on runs as double-digit seeds multiple times, in large part because of that zone defense that's thrown off even I love that West Virginia team, that COVID year with Deuce McBride.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't figure out that Syracuse zone.
Nope.
Rode it all the way to the Final Four in 2016 as a 10 seed. It is a real thing. And this is probably one of my favorite rules because it's definitely true. And it's how upsets happen. I think about Oral Roberts over Ohio State in 2021, two completely different styles of play. And Ohio State wasn't totally ready for the fireworks show that Oral Roberts wanted to pull off. And they did. That's exactly what happened.
They were so lost in that pick and pop.
Ohio State couldn't hang. And that's where upsets from 6-11 to 2-15 happen. I really do like this rule a lot.
Yeah. So I think the other thing, that it's tougher to analyze this and look at, but just how teams defend ball screens and how teams have performed against certain ball screen coverages, which that's something you're going to find on super complicated write-ups and websites that people have other than just watching film and noticing stuff. But that's where you're really getting into the weeds versus hey, you can watch a minute of Alabama basketball and understand that they play different than most teams.
Yep.
So all right, rule 12, another one of my favorites. You can allow yourself to be talked into big-time programs that underachieved. And I absolutely, I don't love it because I hate the team, but I love the timing of UNC being up 47-23 on San Diego State at the half as I am sitting here stressing over this bottom half of the South region as I have been for the last 2 days. This is the 2021 UCLA rule. It is the 2022 UNC rule. It's the 2015 Michigan State, who was a 7 seed that got to the Final Four rule. And as you just mentioned, it is the 2016 Syracuse rule.
There are a lot of them in this tournament.
Mm-hmm.
UConn. We have 8-seeded Gonzaga, 8-seeded UConn, 7-seeded Kansas, 7-seeded UCLA. Trying to think of any others. Is that it?
Yeah, I think so. Not seeing any other real ones. The big time programs thing is very general. It's where do you cut it off? It's basically the teams that have talent and have underperformed relative to their talent during the season. UNC is definitely one. UCLA is another. Kansas, maybe. Although they have plenty of issues of their own. I don't know if Arkansas is quite at the big time program status yet, and they have plenty of issues too. So, this is just a fun one. Because you all of a sudden you look up in 2 weeks and you get a 2022 8 seed UNC team that's in the Final Four.
I'll I'll spoil it right now. I have Houston winning the national championship.
Mm-hmm.
I was so annoyed when I saw Gonzaga was the 8 seed.
Mm-hmm. That good friend of the program and friend of mine, Harrison Vapnick, and I have our daily chats during this week about the bracket, and we talk like we did a weird we once in a while we'll do like trivia with each other, like sports trivia, and we did it often during the summer, and it was always college football themed. We did a college basketball one a couple weeks ago. One of the categories that Harrison gave me was it was basically guess the mid major, guess the tournament mid major, and he would give me a resume and stuff about a certain team, and I would have to guess what mid major he was talking about. And one of the ones he did was 2021 Loyola, and he said they finished the season at number 10 in KenPom, whatever it was, and he got to that part, and I'm just like, you can stop right there. I know which one this is. This is 2021 Loyola, who beat Illinois, and I look at this Gonzaga team that is top 10 in KenPom right now, or like 9th in KenPom right now, and I know they haven't lived up to expectations this year, but you go look at KenPom and you see that number 9 next to their name, and it scares you a little bit. Yeah, I mean, everyone on Twitter has pointed out this week that they're having a tough time with that one, and I can't say I blame them. Let's go to Rule 13. Everybody is a choker until they aren't. Tony Bennett was a March choker until he won the national title. Scott Drew was a March choker until he won the national title. Matt Painter still might be thought of as a March choker to some, and he played for a national title last year. So, basically the rule is nobody goes into a tournament and wins it in their first year. It's very rare that guys go into their third or fourth tournament and win the title. It takes time to build a college basketball program. It takes time to get the luck of the NCAA tournament, and it's just if you think a coach is bad, that's one thing, but if a coach is consistently winning, it's probably more likely that he's just very close to getting over the hump than it is he's a March choker and can't coach in this setting.
Yeah. I like this one. I think the 3 examples you used are fine. The one I might have pushed back on was Virginia, just because they kept losing the same way over and over again, even after they won the national championship.
Yeah. There were legit questions about could Virginia? It wasn't Virginia. It was, could Virginia's style of basketball win the national championship? That was the big question with them.
And what helped in 2019 was that they had NBA caliber players on their team.
Yeah.
Other years they have not had that luxury, and it burned them against Ohio and Furman and UMBC, etc. So I guess that's more of a unique one, but I do like this rule as well.
And just so you guys know, the I guess Virginia of today has become Houston, who does have NBA talent every single year. And it's more often than not on the defensive side of the ball, but they have guys that can put the ball on the rim too this year. Rule 14: before conference tournaments start, write down a list of teams you think can win the national championship. I did this a week before Selection Sunday. I wrote down Duke, Florida, Auburn, Alabama, and Houston were my 5. Not in that order by any means, but I wrote down those 5, just a good reminder not to get off the beaten path.
Yeah, I think that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
doesn't make picking a national championship necessarily easier, but gives you kind of data points of where you're at, because more often than not, a team that is pretty balanced and is one of the best teams for most of the year wins the title.
Yeah, balance is usually key. There's a stat where there are a million billion stats to measure who's probably going to win the national championship, and most, if not all of them, are at least sort of balanced. There are a couple of outliers in there, but usually they're at least very good on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, my only huge problem is some of these stats have very arbitrary cutoff lines. And it's like, okay, yeah, like, and some of them, are also like post-tournament stats where like to win a national championship, you have to play well for 6 games, or maybe not necessarily well, but like if you win 6 games in a row to win the title, your metrics are going to get better. So like, hey, like, Alabama, for example, maybe outside the defensive criteria right now, but if they play well for 6 games, they're going to be inside it. So
that's what happened last year. Like we were that region. Speaking of funny regions, we discussed that one last year. We were like, New Mexico can make the Final Four.
Yeah.
And it just so happened to be Alabama, for as poor as their defense was, played well for enough games.
Rule 15, it's perfectly fine to pick a somewhat lower seed to get to the Final Four, but make sure that team can win 4 games in a row first. This is, this is tough to kind of gauge, who does this and who doesn't. You know in your head, coming in, what teams are more consistent, what teams are not. But looking back at it, it's tough to remember like what are the more consistent teams and what aren't. I will say this: I think this is why bid stealers are relevant, because they just, Oregon State, for example, wins 3 games in a row. NC State wins 4 games in a row in the NCAA tournament. We just saw the week before that team play well for a stretch of games. And like, it's not like, hey, like, oh, they've been up and down all year. It's like, no, they have been bad and possibly turned it around, or just got, crazy shot variance or something in a week. That's why I said it's tough to tell. But I think that's why they're relevant for this question. And I think this applies for a lot of your, 4 through 6 seeds, which like are for the most part pretty inconsistent teams.
Yeah, I think you mentioned this being inspired by Bill Simmons' playoff manifesto. Mm-hmm. I think one of the ones on there, if I'm not mistaken, is don't pick an underdog outright unless you actually believe they can win.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not like, oh, like they've got some shooters.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're kind of fun. No, you have to believe in your heart or your gut, whichever one you choose to go with, that the underdog can beat the favorite. And that's where I run into some problems with like VCU. Do I think VCU is dangerous? Yeah. Do I think they can beat Alabama if they met in the Sweet 16? I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
So this is this latest stretch of rules I've really enjoyed. And like, look, I've made 2 like long form videos over the past 5 years about how you should pick your March Madness bracket. And we're sitting on here dissecting all there is to dissect. And this isn't to like invalidate anything that we do or bracketologists do or people that watch college basketball all year do. Sometimes like people do pick just based off of vibes and momentum. And unfortunately for us that want to tell people what to do with their bracket and however much we want to make ourselves sound intelligent, like those people are right more times than not.
Real quick, I forgot to mention this. It was something I, forgot to write down here, but I want to go back to Rule 13 real quick, that everyone is a choker until they aren't. Quentin, do you know how many active coaches have won a national championship?
Oh, geez. So we got Dan Hurley.
Yep.
Hold on. Calipari.
Calipari has 1. The man he plays on, I believe it's Thursday, has 2.
Oh goodness. Oh, Tom Izzo.
Self has 2. Izzo has 1. And Scott Drew has 1.
Right. With
I think that I think that's it.
Yeah, like, not many.
There are 5 active coaches that have won a national championship. We have lost a lot of great coaches that have titles in recent years. And I think this time in college basketball more than ever is when that rule applies, because you have guys like Kelvin Sampson who have great teams every year, but hasn't gotten it done in the tournament and won a title. Bruce Pearl is consistently producing good teams, regardless of what you think of them. John Shire is 3 years into his coaching career and, has one of the greatest college basketball teams that I've ever seen. Rick Barnes, is still chasing that Final Four, let alone the national title, but he's always got top 10 teams. Todd Golden, young guy. You have a lot of young coaches right now that are still, chomping at the bit. And some of these guys are going to win a title. Some of these guys won't in their career. It's a really tough thing to say somebody is a March choker right now when there's so many young and up and coming coaches in the sport.
Yeah, that's why I don't like ring culture in general, just because like
ring culture in college sports sucks.
It takes so much to get a championship. And some programs make it look a lot easier than it actually is. But just because someone doesn't or hasn't won a title doesn't mean that everything else they've accomplished is invalidated.
Yeah.
I just think it's a nice bonus to what somebody else has already accomplished.
If you are evaluating coaches solely by tournament resume, you're probably not going to get very far. Especially, if you're an athletic director that's, making a hire or, possibly firing a coach, something like that. Which is why I actually give NC State a lot of props for firing Keats the year after he goes to a Final Four. Because, more likely than not, if a coach is bad and has been bad and makes a tournament run, he's still probably going to be bad after that. Yeah. So, and same thing if a coach has been good and gets upset early.
I mean, even at the conference tournament level, we just saw Tobin Anderson get fired.
Yeah, one of the craziest stories in sports.
Hello?
Yeah, Sam has tweeted a lot about it and he's gone and do it pretty extensively. Very weird one, but college sports are weird, and if you haven't been around college sports a long time, you'll find that out very quickly. Rule 16: don't predetermine your first round upsets before you see their matchups. All right, who is that this year? I think it is McNeese State, which and I'll get into something. I think it is Colorado State. Potentially. Could be UCSD. I think, this applies for most of the 12 seeds. More like the popular mid-majors that, people actually do know about all year. I think it applies for that often. We can sit here debating matchups all day. Bottom line for me is just like, evaluate each individual matchup on its own. Don't, sit there and be like, oh, UCSD is going to the Sweet 16, which I have, but don't be like that a week before the tournament, 2 weeks before the tournament, and then, hey, if UCSD had drawn Maryland in the first round, I would have picked Maryland. Like, it's a case-by-case thing. I happen to like their matchup, so maybe not the best example, but yeah, just general rule of thumb, evaluate each individual matchup on its own. Don't make any guarantees, which, it's kind of the final rule. But a couple past examples of this: 2023 Oral Roberts, who lost to Duke in blowout fashion. 2024 McNeese State, who lost to Gonzaga in blowout fashion. 2022 Vermont/South Dakota State. Those are the two that I really fell for that year. And, you try as hard as you possibly can to, flush out everything from your brain, but some things do stick with you. And God, I hated that Providence team.
They were, and look, like, I understood it. Providence was so boring that year.
A couple weeks ago on the pod, I said that no team will ever match the aura of 2022 Providence. Like, well,
yeah,
one of the things I want to say is aura is fun, but it doesn't exactly equate to wins. That's the only team that's the exception for that.
I was going to say, everyone will surpass the aura of Providence because it was like, here, Mr. Watson, do a hook shot most of the time. And that is, like, it was an offense that was pulled straight out of, like, the 1950s. And I understood why people picked South Dakota State, because they were really fun and shot a lot of three-pointers and scored a lot of points. And you want to see that more than Watson taking hook shots every other possession and them running screens like in the middle of the paint, which is just aesthetically very not pleasing at all.
That that team found legitimately every way to win during that season, including like building malfunctions at home to like stop momentum. So it's that's a funny one. Rule, are we a 17 now? Yeah, rule 17. You know the teams you don't like, don't pick a team to go far just because of the number next to their name. All right. This is, two that I fell for, one that I kind of fell for. 2022 Auburn is the most like common one for me. I mean, that team was in what I call the worst NCAA tournament region of all time. And 2024 UNC was in a pretty bad region too. But 2022 Auburn was, I even said it like before they started losing. Like that I was sitting there waiting for them to regress and get back down to the mean. And they got even like way worse than I thought they were going to get to. I mean, they almost lost to a Mizzou Conzo Martin team in the year he got fired. They nearly lost to a Mike White Georgia team that was awful. They did lose at Arkansas. They lost, I think, like at Florida maybe. They lost a couple games down the stretch there after dominating in non-con. But I sat there and I looked at the bracket and I'm just like, horrible region, but Auburn. I guess I'll take Auburn. And sure enough, they got smoked by Miami in the second round.
Yeah, they did.
That was one of the most, fun NCAA tournament games that like really impacted my bracket that I've ever had. I mean, like I picked Auburn to get to the Final Four, but I still wasn't rooting for them in the tournament. Because first of all, their fans were just being like complete idiots online all week. And just like full of themselves for some reason with the region they got. And, second of all, like I've come more down to earth now about him, but I really used to not like Bruce Pearl. And if you know me, you probably know that. I think Bruce has evolved as a coach and has become, like way better than he used to. And I'd even call him a great coach at this point in his career. But one of the problems that I had with that Auburn team is that, they regressed throughout the season and never found their footing when they did. And that's, I think, one of the better examples of the don't pick numbers, pick teams rule.
79-61, man. That game was so fun.
I don't know if you've ever listened to the Titus and Tate segment about that game, but it is I'd call it some of the greatest podcasting ever. Like 10 minutes of like pure like rolling over laughing. It's great. I'll send you the episode later. That'd
be great. I mean, yeah, they played Walker Kessler off the floor, then Isaiah Wong dunked on Jabari Smith, and that was that.
That was it.
That's one of the small handful of sports moments where I've like literally like leapt off my couch.
Like not a rule in here, but one of the ultimate guards win in March moments.
Oh my God. Well, I mean, even like the 23 team guards win in March.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, both of those teams.
Yeah.
Yeah, God, that was a really fun game.
But yeah, this one isn't really a super good, example for this year rule. It's more like I can't tell you who you guys think suck. That's up to you guys. I know who I think suck, and we'll go over that tomorrow night. But I would advise you, if you to really think back and think about who you've been low on over the course of the season, over the course of the final month and a half, and think about like, hey, like, is there a coaching matchup that this team could lose to? Is there a weird team that they play that kind of contradicts their style, stuff like that to look for. Just don't force a team that you think is bad to go deep. Just don't do it.
Yeah, even if it's like not research based, like if you grew up a non-Duke ACC fan, like you probably don't want to root for Duke. So You know what? It's okay if you have them losing Alabama in the Elite Eight. I think it's preferable to find a medley between personal bias and goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do I think I love American University. If they beat Mount St. Mary's tomorrow, like, do I think they'll beat Auburn? Hell no. Like, I would be floored beyond belief if that happened. But I don't want to root for Duke. Like, I was raised a Miami Hurricane. Like, don't really want to root for Florida. And so even if it's that reason, like, I get it. You do you.
Yeah. Rule 18. This is one of the more interesting ones that I've come up with. The reason you want to pick a play-in team to win is more because of the first round opponent than it is the actual play-in team that you pick. So this is actually, this isn't like a rule that I have, a ton of like great like examples built up for like when this hasn't and haven't worked. But this rule was made because of 2021 UCLA, which is a very, very common team in the bracket Bible. They come up so many times. And one of the reasons, the reason for this rule is them. I had Michigan State picked to beat BYU, and then I don't remember if I picked them to beat Texas. But I definitely considered it. UCLA beat Michigan State. I changed my pick to BYU. UCLA blows them out. They obviously beat Abilene Christian, and the rest is history. The next year, I'm like, okay, like the way BYU lost that game said something about them, and it said way more about, I know UCLA went on that huge run, but it said way more about BYU, I think, than it did UCLA. That BYU got toasted in that game, and so the next year, I was all set to pick Rutgers to knock off Alabama in the first round of the 6-11 game, and Rutgers loses in one of the wildest play-in games that you'll see in the NCAA tournament. Loses in overtime to Notre Dame. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right, we're going with Notre Dame this time. And it worked. Notre Dame beat Alabama. I got it right. I was very, proud with the rule. And, we haven't had to use the rule since. We are not going to have to use the rule now because I thought UNC was going to win this game. And I do think I'm going to pick them to beat Ole Miss here. But 2020, like the teams that have won play-in games, 2023 Pitt, I was all set to pick them. Although I would have went with Miss State against Iowa State. And 2024, I didn't pick a play-in winner that year to beat a team that was already in the field of 64, but Colorado knocked off Florida. So you can find all the stats you want about, how many years a play-in team has won a game in however many years. So, this year, I actually am very likely picking both play-in winners to win at least their first round game.
Okay.
And that was not going to change regardless of who won this game tonight or the game tomorrow night. What I think, when I think this rule stops is like, you don't have to take if you think a play-in team is going deeper than like the second round, you don't have to also stick to that for like if they lose their play-in game. At that point, like matchups become matchups.
Yeah, unlike Illinois, speaking of like regressing and slumping, Illinois definitely fits that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. All right, only 2 more rules left to go, and they are very, general rules, more fun rules than super niche. But Rule 19, stop picking teams to win their second round game before they win their first. This goes kind of hand in hand with, don't predetermine your upsets. More, this is one of the ultimate, pick every matchup. Don't pick, teams to go, don't pick teams to go further than you're thinking about. I guess. I don't know if that's the best way to say it, but like, hey, like, don't say like, I'm gonna use Colorado State this time. Don't pick Colorado State to go to the Sweet 16 without like, actually thinking about each matchup to get there. Like, hey, like, what do you think about their Memphis matchup? Okay, now you have them playing Maryland. What do you think about their Maryland matchup? It's not just, hey, Colorado State's going to the Sweet 16. It's Colorado State beat Memphis and Maryland to get to the Sweet 16.
Yeah. It's important to not skip steps because second round matchups a lot of the time do look juicier for certain teams than first round matchups. And what sucks is that in order to get to that second round matchup, you got to win your first one. I look at that pod with A&M, Yale, UCSD, and Michigan. Think either of those teams could get to the Sweet 16, even Yale.
Yeah.
You just got to think about, okay, can they actually win the rebound battle against Texas A&M? What if Texas A&M walks into a really good shooting night with Michigan and UCSD? What if Michigan just doesn't?
Like they did against Nebraska last year.
Yeah, like what if Michigan just doesn't really turn the ball over that much against UCSD, which is like the number one reason people seem to be picking UCSD.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of different stylistic things that you can evaluate in this tournament, and I think one of the more important things is like, hey, like let's sit down and we're not gonna fill out like, hey, this team. This is why I think it's important to fill out. Well, first of all, it's just like the way I think that everyone should fill out their bracket, but I think everyone should go round by round when they fill out their bracket, and not region by region. I think helps you think more clearly. And then we talked about it the other night. One of the things that Sam and I did this year is we spaced out how we filled out our bracket. We did the first round, not right away when we did it, but a couple hours after the bracket was revealed. And then we did the second round later that night, Sweet 16 the next day, Elite 8 the following night, followed by, the Final Four and championship. And it just, I think it gives you a clear head to keep looking at this thing, think of different possibilities, and that leads me into my final rule. And before I read this rule, I am pulling up the text that Quentin sent me earlier today, which I thought was great. And he says, may I ask what the Vontae Mack theory is and how a fictional linebacker relates to March Madness? Well, it's a great question, Quentin, because it's a really general rule that I've somehow related to one of the dumbest but most fun movies that I've ever seen. And that's Draft Day. And Vontae Mack, who was selected by Sonny Weaver and the Cleveland Browns with the first overall pick. And basically the rule is don't fall for the Vontae Mack theory. In the movie, Sonny Weaver Jr. has a Post-it note that says Vontae Mack no matter what. That is the opposite of what you should do in the NCAA tournaments when picking your bracket. You should not guarantee anything. Think of different possibilities. Think of different outcomes. How does point A happen versus point B? How does, one team get to the Sweet 16 versus this team getting to the Sweet 16? Stuff like that. It's really hard to get this stuff right. And, there's a reason why we have all these jokes about, oh, hey, look at me. My bracket's busted on day one. And, all these different, jokes about how hard it is to pick a tournament bracket. But yeah, anything else, Quentin?
No, I'm glad we got the Vontae Mack theory in because that makes a lot of sense. Again, it's a game by game thing that you have to consider if you want to be successful in filling out your bracket. And like it's okay sometimes I think to go in thinking like, oh, like I do think Houston's going to win the national championship. As long as you look at the matchups after that, and then you still come to the conclusion that Houston is going to win the national championship, that's fine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is why I also think it's important to, have certain things in your mind. Like, hey, a week before the selection show, write down what the teams you think can win the national championship. Which teams do you think are underseeded? Which teams do you think are overseeded? Just different kind of stuff. And, just to, before we close this out, if I were to be asked what are, the three most important rules in this to be successful picking a bracket, I'd say rule 17, teams you don't like, don't pick teams to go far just because of the seed. I'd say the rule 6, don't sell yourself on players, sell yourself on teams is one of the more important ones. And then I'd also say that hold on, I had one other in mind. Not that one. Okay, yeah. Everyone is a choker until they aren't. I think those three, maybe not the most fun to, sit here and talk about examples, but probably the three most important to keep in the back of your mind when you got your pen in your hand and you're filling out your bracket. All right, that is going to do it for this episode of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. Quentin, thank you so much for coming on. This was a lot of fun. If you guys, are any Mizzou fans here, go read Quentin's stuff. It is very good. I've known Quentin since he was a freshman. He's now a junior. He is a tremendously talented kid that is going to have a great future in journalism. But if you came to hear about Tyler Self and where he's working, you came to the right place. If you came to hear about 2022 Providence and how much agony they gave me, you came to the right place. And if you came to hear about the latest happenings with Caleb Grill, who will be live in Wichita in just 2 days' time, you came to the right place. This has been Season 5, Episode 79 of Brackets, Bubbles, and Bid Stealers. We'll see you next time.